Good morning, everyone. Are you all doing good? Well, that's great. Now, let us continue being productive by learning from the lessons that I am going to discuss in this video. So now, we will be discussing about the victim precipitation theory and the incapacitation theory. Let us first define victim. So what is meant by victim? Victim is a person harmed, injured, or killed as a result of crime, accident or event, or action. So what is meant by the word precipitate? Precipitate is a product, result, or outcome of some process or action. The victim precipitation theory. It is a criminology theory that analyzes how a victim's interaction with an offender may contribute to the crime being committed. So the theory basically focuses on the responsibility of the victim's victimization in a certain crime. The theory states that the victim is viewed an active participant in the crime. This happens in two ways. First, the victim is the participant who acts first, and the second is that the victim encourages or provokes the offender to commit the crime, which leads to their victimization. So in a crime, the victim is viewed as an active participant, meaning the victim is contributing to the execution of the crime, which happens in two ways. The first way is that the victim acted first, and the second way is that the victim unintentionally does something to encourage the offender to commit that crime. The phrase victim precipitation was first introduced by 20th century criminologist Marvin Wolfgang in his article entitled Victim Precipitated Criminal Homicide. In this theory, Wolfgang describes the victim as the first in the homicide drama to use physical force against his subsequent slayer. The passive and the active precipitation. Passive precipitation means that the victim unconsciously behaves in a way or has a specific characteristic that instigate or encourage an attack. So according to Oxford Languages, being passive is accepting or allowing what happens or what others do without active resistance or response. From the word unconsciously, the victim is unaware of the reasons of his or her victimization because it was stated that the victim behaves unconsciously in a way that it encourages the attacker to commit the crime, meaning the attacker or the offender is the only one with the thought of harming this person, which is the victim. So what are the causes of passive precipitation? Personal conflict, including getting job, promotion, love interest, reputation, power, physical, social, or psychological disadvantages, including being a woman, elderly, and being a minor. Examples are hate crime, terrorism, and child abuse. An example of this are the martial law victims, which I am sure we're all aware about. And why do you think we considered martial law victims as an example of passive precipitation? Simply because the victims are Filipino people, innocent, helpless, and are inferior to the government, and that the government is abusing their power, harming the Filipino people, causing death, incapacitation, and loss of properties. So let's proceed. Active precipitation, on the other hand, occurs when the victim engages in threatening or provocative actions, use threats or fighting words, or even attack first. So based again from the definition of Oxford Languages, being active is engaging or ready to engage in a physically energetic pursuit. So when we say active precipitation, from the word engage, meaning the victim engaged or took part in his or her victimization. It's either the victim attacked first physically or verbally using fighting words that provoke the offender to commit the crime against that victim. So, what's the medium or cost of an active precipitation? Physical force, by using slang words, seductiveness, and wearing sexy dress. Examples are homicide and date rape. So to give an example, let us consider the case of Jonel Nuesca for murdering a mother and a son during a dispute about the son making a loud noise from the air cannon and an ongoing land dispute between the families that provoked Nuesca to kill them. Various research studies have found that people who have an impulsive personality, rendering them as abrasive or obnoxious to others, may have a higher victimization rate. So in addition, negligent persons, quick-tempered persons, and being drunkard are some factors of victimization. Distinction between victim precipitation, facilitation, and provocation. So when we say victim facilitation, it's like the first component of the victim precipitation in which the victim unintentionally make it easier for the offender to commit the crime. And second is the victim provocation, in which the victim does something that encourages the offender to make that crime. And last is the victim precipitation, which both of them are present. So these are the objectives of the victim precipitation theory. First is that it relates to how and why crime happens. Because when we are aware of the reasons or what truly happened in the crime, including the actions of the victim and the offender, we can easily identify and know the root cause of the crime. Second is that it seeks to understand the interaction between the victim and the offender. So we often thought of the offenders who's always responsible in a certain crime, without knowing that most of the crime happens because of the negligent act of the victim itself. Before we proceed to the next topic, I want you to watch this animated video, The Victim Precipitation, in a video illustration.
Callan and Abel are having a drink at the local tavern. Abel owes Callan money, and as the night progresses, Callan becomes increasingly agitated with Abel's failure to pay his debt. Finally, Callan snaps. He shouts at Abel from across the bar, and then charges at him, brandishing a pistol. He fires a shot toward Abel, barely missing his head. Abel pulls a knife and stabs Callan to death as the two wrestle on the floor.
Alright, thank you for watching the video. I hope this video made it easier for you to understand what really is the victim precipitation theory. So without further ado, let's proceed to the next lesson. The incapacitation theory. Lock him up and throw away the key are the common lines we often encounter when we are watching and reading some kind of fairy tales when we are young. And are we aware that this is a kind of incapacitation? So here's the definition. Incapacitation refers to the restriction of an individual's freedom and liberties that they would normally have in society. So basically, incapacitation is the lack of freedom or liberty. Incapacitation theory argues that reductions in crime rates are achieved through higher imprisonment rates since the offender cannot commit new crimes while incarcerated. So this theory mainly argues that the reduction of crime is achieved through some kind of incapacitation or imprisonment of offenders so that they can no longer commit a crime in the future and be a threat to the society. So incapacitation theory is reductivist or forward-looking, which means that it focuses on the reduction of crime, and it was underpinned by the theory of moral reasoning known as the utilitarianism, which opposes actions that cause unhappiness and harm to the society. Thus, the pain or suffering imposed on an offender is justified if it prevented further harm in the society that can be caused by that offender in the future. Moreover, this theory focuses mainly on the victim and not so much with the offender. So listed here are the types of incapacitation: death penalty, imprisonment, curfews, house arrest, electronic monitoring, disqualification from driving for drunken drivers. Barton 2005 suggests, even if the methods of prediction were accurate, there are naturally moral and ethical questions about incarcerating individuals for what they may do rather than what they may have actually done. In this statement, the morality of the offender is the concern. The possibility of what they may do or contribute to the society if they were incarcerated or punished proportionally. The benefits of incapacitation theory. The first is that it removes habitual offenders from a society. Second is that it controls high-risk individuals who commit violent crime. And the last one is that it is an effective deterrent to crime. Since the 1970s and the demise of rehabilitation as a primary aim of punishment, incapacitation has become a significant goal of penal systems in both United States and the United Kingdom. Two strategies have influenced penal policy and practice on both sides of the Atlantic: the 3 strikes and you're out policy and the practice of selective incapacitation. So what is 3 strikes policy? In this policy, the crime you may commit is limited for up to 3. And if you reach the 3rd offense, you'll be up for life imprisonment regardless of the gravity of the crime, but only if one or both of the previous offense is a serious felony. So one of the most oft-cited example of the severity of this 3 strikes principle is the case of Jerry Williams, who in 1995 was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole because he stole a piece of pizza. So imagine you just stole a pizza and you'll be imprisoned for the rest of your life. However, let's move to the second policy, the selective incapacitation. It is concerned with identifying risk and predicting dangerousness. The aim is to incarcerate selectively those individuals who would pose a serious risk to the public if left within or released back to the community. Alright, so in this policy, they are focused on identifying future risk, meaning they will review and conduct an investigation to the offenders who might cause risk and danger if they were released back in the community. Thus, it isolates society's most violent offenders and does not send petty criminals to the prison. It also seeks to address and alleviate prison overcrowding by selectively choosing which offender to incarcerate. The theory of incapacitation assumes that the state has a duty to protect the public from future wrongs or harms, and that such protection can be afforded through some form of incarceration or incapacitation. To give an emphasis, the victim precipitation theory believes that the victim somehow is responsible and that the offender, by any chance, is not the one who's always guilty for initiating an illegal act. However, incapacitation theory focuses on punishing the victim, and the victim is given more attention and more concern. Okay, so with that being said, I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope you learned something from the video reporting. And before we finish, I would like to leave this quote to all of us. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less.